Welcome to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. So I'm here today with Dr. Andrea Chronis-Tuscano, and today we're going to talk about her Succeeds Clinic. This is, in my opinion, one of the crown jewels of the psychology department and a very valuable resource for students here at the University of Maryland. So first, thank you for coming back and joining me on this episode where we can talk about this, Andrea.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Mike.
Maybe we can start with, what does Succeeds stand for?
Succeeds stands for Students Understanding College Choices, Encouraging and Executing Decisions for Success.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yes, and that I am terrible with acronyms, so I have to credit that acronym to the co-founder of Succeeds, Dr. Michael Meinzer, who's now at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The idea behind Succeeds is that coming to college is a huge transition for all students. It's really the first time they're on their own. And for students with ADHD, it is often even harder.
So, I used to think about college students as being sort of young adults, but that's not really the case. They're kind of like tweeners, right? Not tweens, but tweeners between being teenagers and being adults. Can you say a little bit more about this developmental period and why this is important for the type of work that you're doing, or why your work that you're doing is important for this group?
First of all, when you're thinking about youth with ADHD, many times their parents are more involved in things that you might hear, you might say that, well, they should be doing this on their own by now. And so for most kids going off to college, especially if they're not living at home, this is a transition where they're on their own to kind of figure out how to wake themselves up in the morning and how much time they need to get ready and what time they should go to bed and how to space their meals and what to do with their free time between classes. And in high school, kids often just walk to school or get on the bus and they go from class to class to class, and then they go home. Maybe they have practice and they've got homework, but it's sort of dictated by other people. And so this period of emerging adulthood is really the first time that they're sort of launching on their own and figuring all of that out on their own, which takes a lot of executive functioning. So for kids with ADHD, as they move into emerging adulthood, there are often more challenges with some of the sort of more day-to-day kinds of activities that kids without ADHD might be a little bit more prepared for and more equipped to do on their own.
Quick question about this, because it dawns on me that, the nature of parenting has probably changed over time as well. When I was growing, I assume this is true of you too. Like, I pretty much had free range. Like, my parents provided relatively little structure. I had to kind of navigate all of my social relationships, all of my other outside activities. I mean, they were there. They were a very important support structure, don't get me wrong. But there wasn't like this constant presence of, now it's time to do this, Mike. Now it's time to do that. Do you feel that this change in parenting style might have something to do with this inability to sort of regulate some of these things?
Yeah, so some people refer to this as over-parenting, and the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy had this whole public service announcement about how stressful parenting is and how it's different than when you or I or he were kids. And I think that that's true. But again, I think it's compounded for parents of children with ADHD who really want to see their kids be successful.
Yeah.
And so they might do a little extra and do a little bit more extra. And then what happens is sometimes there's this sort of steep decline in parental support. So the parents are there kind of helping to guide the kids along in terms of schoolwork to now with being able to check Canvas or some other, online educational system, Google Classroom. It really doesn't necessarily set kids up for the ability to transition to a more independent lifestyle. And then there are also other systems in place like FERPA, which make it difficult for parents to and HIPAA.
So just FERPA being the federal guidelines around what academic information that schools can provide to parents of adults, legally definition adults of age 18 and greater, right? That's
correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then HIPAA is the equivalent for health information. So what you see is that a teenager might have a parent who was checking their grades online or getting daily or weekly alerts about any failing grades, and then all of a sudden they're off to college and they might not hear hear anything till the end of the semester.
Is there some, like, is ADHD a risk factor for GPAs, or for withdrawal from school, failing, and that sort of thing? Can you tell us a little bit about why the things you're going to talk about with Succeeds are really important, how they can support student success?
I think that most people underestimate how serious ADHD could be. And so we know in general that ADHD is a risk factor for things like later depression, suicidal ideation and attempts and completion, things like trouble with the law and incarceration, things like substance abuse. And there's even been shown to be a 10 to 15 year reduced life expectancy for individuals with ADHD. So for many, many years, many individuals with ADHD never made it to college in the first place. And so now people with ADHD are attending college more than ever before. And the estimate is that about 8% of college students have ADHD. And it's the largest reason why students go to disability support services or accessibility and support services for accommodation. So this is a really significant issue on college campuses. And of course, speaking about parents again, parents want their kids with ADHD to be able to move on to college. So again, from the parents' perspective, they might be doing a little extra because they want to see their kids succeed. Right. And it's a really delicate balance between, when do I let them fail so that they learn a lesson, and how do I provide just the right amount of scaffolding? In fact, my doctoral student, Hong Bui, for her dissertation, is trying to develop an intervention for parents to kind of help them navigate that transition. Because of course, developmentally, teens and young adults want more freedom. They don't want their parents sort of on their backs or nagging. And then at the same time, the parents, as much as they would love to kind of let go a little bit more, they also don't want to see their kid fail. So it's really a very tricky balance. And we do know that students with ADHD who go to college are more likely to have lower GPAs, they're more likely to take incompletes and withdraw from classes, and they're less likely to complete their degree, which of course has implications for their financial autonomy going forward.
Okay, so that brings us to Succeeds now. So what sort of services does Succeeds provide for students?
Maybe I can back up and also say Succeeds has sort of a three-part mission, one being the clinical services that we provide, one being the training of grad students to work with our Succeed students, and then thirdly, we do research. The whole idea for Succeeds sort of launched from an NIH training grant that my student, Mary Rooney, who's now at the National Institute of Mental Health, many years ago did a study on substance use in college students with and without ADHD, and just showed this hugely increased risk for substance use disorders. From that, we developed an intervention for heavy drinking college students with ADHD. And we realized that as much as we wanted to help those students, that really all students with ADHD across campus really needed some support and help with skills. And so from that grew the Succeeds Clinic. So in Succeeds, we have a weekly group that is generally run by our co-director, Dr. Erin Jones, with our graduate students in clinical psychology, or by our advanced doctoral students alone. And so in these weekly groups, the leaders provide evidence-based strategies to the students with ADHD, and it's really nice to have them come together and learn from each other, because sometimes they might feel like they're alone and they're the only ones that are struggling with these things. Right. Yeah. So that's nice. But what we know about ADHD is that there's also difficulties at the point of performance, meaning that it's great to go to this group once a week, but individuals with ADHD might have a hard time putting those skills into practice without additional support. So for that reason, each student in Succeeds is also assigned a coach that they meet with up to an hour a week, which could mean 10 minutes a day, or it could mean meeting twice a week for 30 minutes or once a week for an hour. And what happens in those sessions is we really sort of brainstorm and troubleshoot how to put those strategies into action. We also have them bring in all of their syllabi and make sure that they're plugging all of the dates into a Google Calendar. We also work with them on planning ahead for things like course registration. We help them break down long-term assignments. We have them set goals that are value-driven, meaning that sometimes we work with students who say, I want to go to medical school, but then on a day-to-day basis, what are the things that they need to do to get there? Well, they need to go to class. They need to keep up with their reading, etc. So we do that. We help them chunk longer term assignments. And we also focus on their emotional well-being, their mood and anxiety. We also help them with their social relationships, which is another area that many students with ADHD struggle. So sometimes we have students who, are involved in Greek life on campus. And so they might have lots of friends and go to lots of parties and maybe not always make the best decisions about when to go out and when might not be such a great time to go out, like the night before an exam or when they have a big paper due. We also have students with ADHD who come to campus and then really have a hard time engaging with different clubs, have a hard time making friends and sort of finding their people on campus. And so we might need to go to the First Look Fair with them or come up with a plan for how they're going to go and to have them set goals about going to a club meeting or something like that. And then we also have students who are really hesitant to take the first step to get accommodations or to talk with a professor in a class that they're struggling with. And so sometimes in those individual coaching sessions, we actually have them take the first step, like make that appointment with the writing center.
So you sit down there with them as they're like typing in their email or putting in the request. No, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise, there's always the struggle with are they actually going to do it once they leave the session? Yeah. So if we see that, then we have them do it right there. We also have supervised study hall where they set an intention or a reasonable goal for the hour that they're sitting in the group with others. And then we also do a lot of education around campus. So we have talked to people in the dorms, and we've talked to folks in Greek life, and we've talked with, the family liaisons, and we've presented at orientation, and we've presented to professors about how they could support students with ADHD. And then we've done community presentations. So we really try to kind of take a broad approach to being able to help the student and their parents, but also to see what we can do systemically to try to make a big university like UMD friendlier to students with ADHD who might need a little bit extra support.
The goal here is then, I guess, right, to provide that scaffolding that the students need to manage their own skills. This might sound somewhat critical. Is this just an extension of overparenting?
Yeah, we think about that a lot because obviously we want them to go to work, right? Eventually to get an internship and eventually a job, and to be able to use those skills independently in those settings. And so what we do is, as students are working with us, we do try to scale back to make sure that they're taking ownership and doing more and more of this on their own. That is something we've thought about a lot. Oh, another thing that I didn't mention is that a lot of times our students, their parents are still making doctor's appointments for them or picking up medications for them. So we also try to help them begin to kind of keep lists for when they meet with their medical provider or maybe the prescriber if they're taking ADHD medications. And so we're trying to get them to be more independent.
This all sounds very good, but it also sounds like a lot of work, both for you and the clinic director, Aaron. And just seems like a lot of stuff going on.
Yes, that is the name of the game with the Maryland ADHD program. We're doing a lot, and we are constantly trying to think about how we can reach more students with ADHD on campus. Do we well,
how many students are you serving right now on a say semester to semester basis or an annual basis? About how many students do you have?
So typically we have anywhere between 18 to 22, on average 20 students that we treat in a given semester.
And so you think that could easily be 8% of the student population at Maryland. So there's about 30,000 students on campus.
Right.
So 8% of that?
Yes. And there's so many that we aren't able to help. And so Dr. Erin Jones, who is the co-director of Succeeds, who really does the training and hands-on day-to-day supervision of our trainees who are working with these students, we're constantly trying to think about how we can reach more students, but that's probably going to mean that we are doing it in a less intense way.
Right.
So is it possible for some students to have a group-only approach? And will they still benefit from that as opposed to having a coach as well, an individual coach? So these are some things that we've been thinking about. Right now, the program is fee for service, and that's really just to cover the salary of our co-director, Dr. Jones. And even so, that can be prohibitive for some students. So we're really trying to think about ways to combat some of those issues. And in fact, Mike Meinzer, who co-founded Succeeds with me back in 2018, he's been able to figure out lots of different ways to do this at UIC because he's serving mostly first-generation college students, many of whom don't have resources, and many of whom might be hesitant to talk to their parents about the fact that they think they might have ADHD because of stigma and other
Do all the
barriers.
students, this raises an interesting question, do all the students who come into your program, you do an assessment at intake or whatever, right?
Yes.
And I mean, so you're verifying that they have ADHD, but like there could be so many students who don't know they have ADHD or might suspect it. I mean, how do you capture all those students?
Yeah, and one of the things that we're concerned about is that it seems like the most resourceful, it's usually parents.
Yeah.
The most resourceful parents are the ones that find us. They find us through our website. There's a great video that Vsauce produced that's on our website. They're able to find us, and then they have the resources to be able to pay for the program. And it's pretty reasonable given all they get, but it still requires an investment. And in order for the program to work, the students themselves have to be really motivated.
Right.
We have had situations where parents were gung-ho and the students were ambivalent, and that doesn't always work. So so we are definitely trying to think about ways that we could reach the students directly. There have been students that we've talked to and that we see that are not sure that their parents would be on board. And I think that's what Mike encountered at UIC, that they're students who need help, who've never had a diagnosis, who know something is wrong, who really, really could use our services. So how do we do that? And so we're constantly thinking about that. We've also noticed that there's less diversity in who makes it to Succeed compared to the university demographics as a whole. Yeah. So why is that? Could we be doing things in a more culturally sensitive manner? Yeah. What needs to happen for us to be available to more students and more diverse students?
These are critical questions, obviously, and probably also not very easily answered. Like there's probably multiple research projects that could be done just to address those questions about how to reach a broader audience. I guess one last question before we close this out. If students or parents are interested to learn more about Succeeds, how can they get in contact with you or Erin?
Well, the easiest thing to do is probably to go to umdadhd.org and then search Succeeds, and you can get all of the information about the program. You can also email succeeds@umd.edu, and someone will get in touch with you to answer your questions.
That's perfect. And if there's anybody out there who wants to donate to the Succeeds program, please reach out to our department. You can either reach out to Andrea or myself. Or this is an incredibly valuable program. It provides so much value to the university. It's such an important resource for students and something that is really, I think, badly needed here at University of Maryland.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Andrea.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.